Hey everyone, welcome back to your Business in Healthcare. Today we're going to talk about the operations of a medical center. And I'm joined with Sarah Boorman, the operations manager of M3 Health. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So look, I think an operations manager, like we were chatting before, it's often quite confusing what exactly your role is, what's the scope. Could you just give everyone a bit of an overview of what an operations manager do?
Yeah, so operations manager is really looking at the operations of a medical centre. So we produce appointments, is what we sell. So operations role is to streamline that process. I mean, if you talk to operations managers, our job is to make things better, faster or cheaper, depending on what the operational requirements of the business are. So there's a lot beyond that, but if you were to really condense it down to its bare essentials, operations management is better, faster, cheaper.
Better, faster, cheaper. Love it, love it. So what are the I guess the common challenges that you see, people in this role struggle with?
Yeah, I think there's some common challenges. The first one is that you can be dragged into becoming chief firefighter. So there's a lot of urgent and important things that happen in medical centres every day, every moment of every day. And I suppose if we're not careful as operations manager, we just spend our time putting out fires, which really we need to spend a portion of our time doing that. But our end goal is for things to proactively get better and to make iterative changes to systems and processes, so that we're not stuck in firefighting mode and that our people aren't stuck in firefighting mode. So that's probably a universal challenge of management. How do you protect enough dedicated time to make sure that you're doing some proactive things? You're working on the business as well as working in the business.
Right. So just for the practice owners in the audience here, how do we, could you give us an example of how that's done?
How you protect time?
How you protect time and how you elevate yourself, out, to working on the business instead of in the business.
Yeah. I'm a massive fan of scheduling. So I am completely disciplined and anal about my schedule. Everything goes in my Google Calendar. And the first things that I put in are the non-urgent, important, strategic things that I'm working on that week. And then everything else has to fit in around it. So having discipline around how you schedule time, and also around how people access you. So we have to do a lot of work in the beginning, particularly if you've got kind of a open access culture where you're, always accessible. You sort of want to start putting boundaries around that, where, I'm available for Q&A during this time. What are some of the things you've tried to solve the problem before you attempt to bring it to me? Those sorts of scaffolding skills are really important. But if you want to protect your time, you have to have a schedule.
Yeah, for sure, because I think, as operations manager, your attention can just be, everywhere, like you said, firefighting, and it's hard to, keep a business running that way. So what are, I guess, some of the common workflows that you think, because you're a coach for practice owners as well, like what are some of the lower hanging fruits that they can, fix in terms of their workflow in their clinic that they can implement, like, once they get out of lockdown?
Yeah. Look, we always say in Scale My Clinic that the source of your biggest frustration is also where the magic is. So if you're, at the moment in most medical centres, that's phone calls. So that's the biggest source of your pain, the biggest source of your frustration. That's what you need to be directing your time, energy and resources into fixing. And it changes. I mean, phone calls were not always the biggest source of our frustration previously. It changes, but whatever's causing you the most pain is where to start.
Right. So when you say phone calls, like what do you mean by that? Like,
Yeah, so we measure all of the inbound calls into our centres, and because of the palaver of a vaccine rollout, we typically, so for example, at our flagship clinic, we maybe receive 500 phone calls a week. With the Pfizer vaccine changes to eligibility, etc., we're currently experiencing around 1,500 phone calls a week. So huge jump. And the problem with that is, we're meeting it with, we're meeting non-linear demand with a linear workforce. So, we're not able commercially to put on more medical receptionists to deal with that massive surge in phone calls. So that's a big problem. And
so what's the how did you guys sort of attempt to solve that?
How do we unpack it? Yeah, great question. So for those really big problems that have a lot of different moving parts, my favorite thing to do is start with a logic tree. So break the problem down into its component parts, and then start gathering data. So in that example of a phone call, you're looking at where are all these phone calls coming from? So you might gather some data for a couple of days, and then you will make changes based on that data. So when you look at the data, what changes can I make that's going to have the biggest impact right now? And that's where you start.
Right, there you go. So rather than just freaking out and going nowhere, you calm down.
So that's again, getting out of firefighting mode. Like even just the process of getting it all out onto a logic tree is cathartic, and it's even a great exercise to do with your teams, because your medical receptionists will be overwhelmed right now, practice managers are overwhelmed. So just doing a session where it's like, okay guys, let's get all of this stuff out on a whiteboard or a virtual whiteboard, even that will yield insights that will promote action.
Yeah, great. Look, speaking of teams, I know I always talk about this because I've heard so many practice owners talk about that teams, like managing staff and team, is one of the hardest, responsibilities, and it often gets very hard. Like, so I'm just going to point out a few examples here, so we're not just talking, sort of cloudy sort of stuff. So, for example, if you have two employees that don't get on with each other, that are fighting, or there's some sort of culture in the tension in the culture. Sorry, some sort of tension in the culture. What's the process? So do you guys have an SOP on how to resolve that?
Yeah, so I am a huge fan of peer-to-peer accountability. So I have a ground rule: don't come and complain to me about somebody else that works. That works. So as a leader, you have to make sure that you're setting the ground rules, that you're providing a psychologically safe environment. And a part of that is you don't want people coming to whinge to you about another co-worker. It's peer-to-peer accountability. So rather than listen to them whinge or just aid in that kind of toxic culture, what I would do is I'd spend some time empowering them to have that conversation with that person themselves, and just unpack why that is so important that they're able to do that. So we're a big fan of the situation, behaviour, impact framework. So it's empowering people to say, okay, if you need to have a conversation with a co-worker because things are really not going well for you, here's how you do it. Think of a specific situation. What's the behaviour that's been demonstrated? And then what's the impact of that behaviour for you? Because at the end of the day, when somebody complains about another person, it's not the person that they're complaining about, it's the relationship. And a third party is just not able to mend a relationship between two other people that are not them. So, you can come and complain to me, but the best thing I can do is empower you to actually have that conversation yourself. If I don't do that, I am just contributing to a toxic culture.
Yeah, wow, that is that was a total sort of shift for me that it's the relationship between the two, and only they can change that sort of relationship.
Yeah, and then getting them to realize that there's always two of us in a relationship. You know, you can't be in a relationship with yourself. So a part of that process is examining, okay, this relationship is broken. What part have I played in this relationship breaking down? And then if that person can own their part, the other person can own their part, then we move forward.
Right, I see. That's really powerful. Okay, now, okay, let's just say now if the problem is not, you know, between two employees. Now, for example, if you've, I don't know, introduced new tech or technology to the practice, and obviously you have you know, staff members with different tech, you know, savviness. How and say, I don't know, senior staff members may not be that tech savvy, and the junior ones are. How do you manage that dynamic, you know, between, I guess, you know, senior and junior? Is that still a thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, change management is a huge area. I suppose the biggest thing that I have learned in my experience is that with all change, you're going to get that standard deviation kind of bell curve. So you're going to get your models, you're going to get your not yet. So you know, I'm just hanging back to see how the models are going to go, and then you're going to get your nevers. So when we talk about change management, particularly things like, oh, I'm wary about introducing new tech, or I'm wary of changing this particular process, the first thing that comes to mind and the first thing that makes us nervous are the people who are never going to get on board. And the Pareto principle definitely applies here. 80% of your time, effort, and energy will be spent on the 20% of people that you will never get on board. So what I would say is, if you're introducing change, you need to focus on, you don't need to focus on the models, they're already there. So build a coalition of the willing around your models and just focus on the people who are not there yet. Because whilst we can't change that standard deviation, we can change the shape of the curve and make it higher. So what we want to do is, everyone who's not there yet, we want to make them a model, and we just forget about the never. So we turn it into a sharp curve with a long tail.
Right, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So you would, in practical terms, you would, I guess, provide them with more support, more. How does it look like?
Yeah, so we, particularly for those of us that are process driven, sometimes we can neglect the story. So it's the why piece. Why are we making this change? What's in it for you? How is this change going to make your reality better? And just investing that time up front in that change. And then if you've got a psychologically safe workplace, the art of influence is really important. So what you want to do is, you want to bring all of those doubts up to the surface. So if you're working with people who are not there yet because they're not quite sure, you want to hear about all of those doubts. So you want to consult rather than sell in the initial stages. So tell me all of your fears and doubts about this. What's concerning you about getting on board? What's holding you back? You want to just bring all of that stuff up to the surface. Then once you know it, you can work with it. And then you can kind of say, oh, look, we've thought about this. This is why we're doing it this particular way, you know, et cetera, et cetera. You can build scaffolding and support around those concerns, so people are eased heading into the process. But often we don't do that. Often we're just like, yeah, there's this new process and I'm so excited and I want it launched straight away. And then when people don't get on board, we get frustrated, and then we try to make them get on board, and that just takes
you don't get it.
Now tell us that they're following this process, but they're really not, because when we check in later on, they're still doing the thing from before. So it's just spending a little bit more time at the start.
Right. I see. I think that blends in nicely with what I wanted to transition next to, which is giving feedback. And I've seen this done very poorly, and most of the time it's just laziness. And I've seen this done very extremely well. Like, what do you think is what makes, you know, the sort of feedback session good or excellent? Like, what makes it good?
Yeah, so there's two things. And this is not my work. It comes from a book called Radical Candor, and I can't remember the name of the author. But to deliver feedback well, you need two things. You need to care personally and challenge directly. So the intention has to be right. So the intention behind giving feedback has to be in service to that person's growth and development. If you're giving feedback because you're completely frustrated with someone and you really want to clout them about the head with it, it's not going to land. It's just not going to land, and you're going to blow up the relationship. So you need and the other thing is, people can't grow into pain. So if you're giving feedback to someone, if all of they sense is this frustration and anger and disappointment, they're not psychologically going to be able to construct anything useful around that feedback to then go and apply it. Right. So if the intention is right and it's about growth and it's about development, then you can challenge much more strongly and have that challenge land. So that's what I would say about feedback. It is a skill. You need to do it often. When you first start doing it, you're going to do it really badly, and that's okay. You just need to apologize a lot. As long as your intention is good, you'll get there.
No, you're so right, because we're learning about sort of what makes good feedback in med school, and one of the things they say which makes poor feedback is not giving directions on how to improve. Like they give you feedback externally and say, hey, that's wrong or that's bad, but they don't tell you what you should do next to better yourself, to better your craft.
Yeah, look, that's certainly a part of it. Some parts of the challenge of feedback is sometimes getting a little too prescriptive with it. So it's, for me, it's about providing a safe place and holding space for someone to have that reflection and say, okay, I get that. And these are the things I'm going to try moving forward. And sometimes, yeah, you're right. If somebody's truly stuck, you do need to unstick them by showing them a pathway forward. That's a skill in itself, I think, to scaffold, because, you know, ideally, we want to build resilience. We want to build, you know, we want to build all of those skills. And the key part of that is, how can I unstick myself from this situation?
For sure. Wow. And what happens if the sort of same process, I guess, happens to patients? So, for example, if a patient leaves you a 1-star Google review on Google and accuses one of your staff or one of your doctors of unprofessional behavior, what's the process there? How would you approach it?
Yeah, so the first part is to get a bit of the connective tissue and context around what's going on for this person. What's the story? Look, there's a part of people just complain when they're angry, you know, so that's the challenge when it comes to Google reviews and marketing. You know, people have to have an unbelievably positive experience to leave positive feedback. And the challenge in healthcare is that people come to us in distress. They come to us because they have a problem that needs to be solved, and typically with some kind of urgency. So we deal with people at their most vulnerable. So when they leave feedback like that, we want to understand what was going on with that person at the time. What are all the parts of it? And then once you understand that, a pathway will arise. And also, we can't discredit the fact that they might just be, you know, not the right patient for us. So in that situation, we just say, look, I really think, so for example, we have private billing medical practices. So sometimes new patients come to us with an expectation that they'll be bulk billed. And then they might, you know, obviously we tell them before they book and all of that sort of stuff, but sometimes we get negative Google reviews about, hey, you know, why do I have to pay for my medical appointment? And we just say, yeah, you're not for us and we're not for you. You know, there's a bulk billing clinic down the road, and they're much going to be able to, you know, meet your needs much better than we can.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
So sometimes it's waking up with people and saying, look, we're not for you, you're not for us, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I think that's, to be honest, I think that's one of the sort of mental, I guess, bottlenecks, if you may say, that we have in healthcare, which is that when we, you know, go to uni, you know, when we start up in our career, we want to help everyone, we want to service everyone, and the reality is, unfortunately, economics does not work that way.
That's right. And I think, look, getting really clear on who you're for and who you're not for in healthcare is an amazing talent, because you need a lot of grounded confidence and humility to be able to do that. And once you do that, it just means that the people that you are for, you're going to have such a huge impact with, because you're suited. I mean, the beauty of medicine is the therapeutic relationship, right? So if that's right, then the outcomes will follow. And the fact is that we're not for everyone. So the quicker that we get clear on who we are for, I think the bigger impact we can make.
Fantastic. So look, if I'm a practice manager and I'm like, wow, I want to get in touch with Sarah to chat more, how do I get in touch with Sarah?
Well, the only way you can get in touch with Sarah is so I coach through Scale My Clinic. So
Yeah.
I coach all of the practice managers in Project X. So if you're a practice manager and you're not receiving any coaching, then Scale My Clinic, get a membership, and we'd love to work with you.
Right.
We coach general practice owners, practice managers. Full suite of support available.
Fantastic. Cool. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate you jumping on.
Thanks for having me.